Okay, so this video went through a bit of a process. Originally, I was just going to revisit the Salmon Run review and talk more in depth about the stage design. I'm still very proud of my original video, but if there's one regret I have about it, is that I don't really go into the stage design nearly as much as I should have. I just kind of go the stage got collision and you can throw, I kind of just go the stage got collision and you can throw eggs, 10 out of 10, would let them watch my dog. So I was going to make this video as a sort of addendum. That's why it doesn't really have its own unique thumbnail. I didn't really request one. But as I was playing, I noticed something. Oh my gosh, it's shit! It just wasn't a fun stage to play on. So I changed course like an indecisive college student and started making a video about how Marooner's Bay, as a stage, failed. So I worked on that, and I even got a whole script written out for it and some editing done. But while making it, a lot of time has passed. So much time that 2 stages got added to the mix. Salmon Jammin' Junction, as well as the returning Salmonid Smokeyard. And you know what? Salmonid Smokeyard sucks too! At this point, I decided to take a step back and really look at things from a more broad perspective. The 3 new stages made for Splatoon 3 are all very fun, well designed, and engaging. Meanwhile, the returning Splatoon 2 stages are kind of frustrating and feels very cramped. So I decided to scrap everything I worked on up to that point and start from scratch, focusing on comparing the maps from Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3, how the design philosophy behind them changed, and why the returning maps feel so unfun in comparison, even though many of them felt fine back in Splatoon 2. Alright, let's get into it, which is what my dad said right before creating me. Let's go ahead and talk about the egg throw real quick. As useful as this ability is, it actually doesn't really change too much about how you interact with the maps. In fact, if the egg throw was all that was added, then the Splatoon 2 stages would actually be much easier since you're able to pass along eggs quicker to the basket. Like on Marooner's Bay, you can just launch the eggs from the sides rather than having to ride up the elevators or going around to the front of the ship. Salmonid Smokeyard is similar. You could just toss the eggs across from one island to the other. The new stages do feel more built with the egg throw in mind. Sockeye Station has this tower to launch eggs from, Salmon Jammin' Junction has these ledges below to toss them up to the grates above, and Gonfitch and Hydro Plant has you toss eggs from the outside area in. But still, they're pretty much a complete net positive. No, it's the side effect of the addition of the eggs that causes most of the problems, the difficulty. Okay! Since egg throwing would obviously make the game easier, the developers increased difficulty to compensate. The max hazard level was increased from 200% to 333%, chums attack at a much faster rate, making them an actual threat rather than just a minor annoyance, and new bosses that the Splatoon 2 maps don't really take into account. I think the best way to show off how these seemingly minor changes completely messed the new maps is going over the map that was most affected by it, Marooner's Bay. What kind of place is this? If the difficulty is high enough, this map can feel downright unplayable. Okay, but before I go into why it doesn't work for Splatoon 3, let's discuss its role in the game it was actually designed for, Splatoon 2. The big gimmick with this one was that it was one of the longest stages of the game. If you wanted to get to the basket, you'd have to take these elevators that were on either side or go the long way around to the front of the ship. There was this underpass here that allowed quick access to either side of the ship, so if a teammate gets fucked, then you can quickly get over there and help them out. Bosses can spawn all around you, from the docks to the shores to the other end of the ship. They can really come from anywhere, so it's all about using the shortcuts and pathways the game provides you to kill these bosses and bring the eggs to the basket as quickly and efficiently as possible. They once asked a priest to draw what Satan looked like, and he came back with this. Overall, not a bad stage, but the new difficulty completely destroys it. You see, many pathways that were present in Splatoon 2's maps were just made completely worthless in this game. The pathway under the ship that was made to help you get to either side quickly is now pretty much just a surefire death trap. When I mention that chumps attack faster, I mean it. They will hit you the moment you enter their range, rather than waiting a couple seconds because the information from eyes to brain is as slow as molasses. Not only that, but there's just a whole lot more of them due to the higher percentage that the maps can be filled with. In Splatoon 2, you could pretty much just brute force your way through chums without a care in the world. It still could be dangerous, but it was mostly worth it. And of course, you could still shoot them down since there wasn't usually that many of them to clear them out quickly if you didn't want to rush it. They came in pretty small numbers, so it wasn't that big of a deal. You can see this in other maps too. Spawning Grounds on High Tide has these linear grates that you need to walk on, and Salmonid Smokeyard has this lower area here that you can find yourself in. They're not as bad since even in Splatoon 2, the grates were always meant to be more dangerous anyway, and in Salmonid Smokeyard, this lower section was a spot you really weren't supposed to find yourself too often in anyhow. But this pathway in Marooner's Bay was 100% supposed to make traveling easier, but now it's made completely useless due to the higher amount of chums and their danger level. You could try to clear them out, but it's really not worth it, and you're better off just using the elevators to the top to get over that way. It's not just the pathway though, the entire map feels cramped and hard to maneuver around. The ship is very thin with small pathways, the docks are long and narrow, making killing stingers a pain in the butt. The basket area is very tiny tiny. That's another smaller thing I should mention, the basket area. If you look at the areas around the basket, you'll see how much bigger they are in Splatoon 3 compared to Splatoon 2's. Sockeyes is large and round, Salmon Jammin' Junction is very long and extends quite a distance. This is because the bosses can come in spilling rapidly, so it allows some wiggle room to be able to maneuver around and escape. Meanwhile, a stage like Marooner's Bay has its area around the basket so small and cramped. If things get too hectic, your only real escape is to jump off the side, like someone who just can't take it anymore. Which really isn't exactly a desirable position since you're now further away from the basket. In Sockeye and Gonefish and Hydro Plant, if you need to escape, they let you travel upwards, that way you can still get eggs into the basket since you can just throw them down. This ties into the bosses as well. Big shots can be particularly annoying since on Marooner's Bay, the shockwaves cover the entire area around the basket. You really can't get away from it unless you want to get away from the basket as well. Slime and Liz can block off the access to the rest of the ship since you can't shoot through their little barriers here. It's also the only pathway for bosses to get to you, so it really gets you trapped. You can get it to slam down, but good luck with that when a steel eel's passing through. I know Salmon Jammin' Junction also kind of has those thin pathways that the Slime and Lids can block, but unlike Marooner's Bay where you're kind of back to a corner, here you have a lot more room to work with, and you just kind of like abandon them for a little while, make them come closer to the basket if you really want to. You're not completely trapped when he just blocks that area. This brings me to my next point, lack of options. Since it's Splatoon 3, the chums and bosses are way more difficult to bypass, the new maps give you plenty of routes to escape, plenty of inkable walls to climb to get to higher ground, big open areas to attempt to get around the chaos, multiple paths and escape routes that you can use to jump to, like in Salmon Jammin' Junction. You can jump in between the water here, so if you're being chased, they'll have to take the real long way around. Marooner's Bay lacks any of that. There are almost no inkable walls, at least none that matter, so if you get surrounded, your best bet is to try to take the elevator. But even that's not always going to work since they can clutter you on that as well. If you're on the ship and you want to escape, you have to go to an area that puts you in an unhelpful spot. Salmon and Smokeyard is very similar with the lack of options. Not a whole lot of inkable walls. Still more than Marooner's Bay since they have some around the basket, which is nice. But this middle section, nope. You gotta go the long way around. Salmon is filling the platforms and you're just trying to get out of there. It's brutal. This is also why I haven't really been bringing up spawning grounds a lot. This is where the Salmonids have sex. Because it's the only one that really doesn't have this issue. There are plenty of inkable walls to climb to get out of a bad situation. The area, while still being cramped, is still wider and more open compared to the other two. It's nice. Still, even spawning grounds faces one major issue that all the Splatoon 2 maps face. And I'm not just talking about the ones in Splatoon 3. All the maps in Splatoon 2 share this one problem. The location of the boss spawns. You see in Splatoon 2, the bosses can spill in from any direction on the map. Behind, to the sides, in the front, there's really no spot they can't come from. Meanwhile, in Splatoon 3, they're much more limited in where they can come from. Sockeye being the most limiting, only being able to come from this beach side over here. The entire area behind the basket is gated off. Scrappers ain't gonna get through that. It's their weakness. Because there's so many bosses in Chum now, keeping where they can spawn limited makes it a lot easier to keep track of them all, and it makes taking care of them and reaching them at a moment's notice a lot easier. Not only that, but allows your teammates to stick together more often, or at the very least, never be too far apart from one another. In Splatoon 2, it wasn't too uncommon to split away from your teammates since bosses are spawning from all around you. You need to get to them individually if you want to take care of the problem. In a way, it almost feels like Splatoon 2 kind of encourages it. When I initially wrote this script, I made a whole thing about how the teamwork in Splatoon 2 felt a lot more passive, while the Splatoon 3 one felt more active. What I meant was that in this game, I thought that you were encouraged to go off and do your own thing. More about carrying your own weight rather than directly helping each other out. And how Splatoon 3, because of the egg throw and more compact design, made it where you're more forced to actively work with each other and watch each other's backs. But while recording and editing that segment, something didn't really sit right with me. If Splatoon 2 really was encouraging that, then it would seem like it would be kind of weird to have snatchers come by and snag eggs when they're left alone. And it's not like the snatchers in Splatoon 3 where they can carry them over the basket. No, they just come from the shore, get their hands on a few of them, and that's it. They just go back to the shore. They're not going to be helpful there, bastards. So you would want your teammates to come over and help you out. It was completely contradictory to what I was trying to convey in my analysis. So I thought about it some more and it finally clicked. Splatoon 2's maps were not designed to fit an entirely different playstyle. It encourages active teamwork as much as Splatoon 3's. It was just that a lot of design in Splatoon 2's maps just didn't really have to be as tight as Splatoon 3's. Very minor stuff like a small basket area, thin pathways, lack of inkable walls, boss spawn locations, all this wasn't that big of a deal with Splatoon 2's difficulty. It was just not stuff that the developers really had to consider, since it was never really an issue in that environment. But now that they cranked up the difficulty, these minor elements they probably didn't give much thought now become a much bigger deal and completely direct how stages need to be designed moving forward. I guess you could say the design in Splatoon 2's is just a lot more relaxed, since it never really pushed itself too far. It does make me question though why they decided to bring them over with no changes. The developers were very clearly aware of the issues that these stages had, it's why they took a different approach with the design of the new maps, yet they didn't make any changes to the returning stages. Like Marooner's Bay could have made with a bigger basket area, or just the ship itself, make it much bigger, make the pathways underneath wider, maybe even add an elevator down there or something like that, but they didn't, and it makes Marooner's Bay borderline unplayable. That's not really an exaggeration. Marooner's Bay High Tide is like impossible on higher difficulties. Oh yeah, I guess I never really brought that up. In Salmon Run, the tides can change, making your area a lot more bigger or smaller to work with. High tide is obviously when the area is a lot smaller, so it's a lot more difficult to work with. Bosses and chum will come spilling in a lot faster, and your area will be completely overrun if you're not on top of it. But the upside is that the eggs are much closer to the basket, making egg gathering pretty much a non-issue. So you can just focus entirely on killing bosses and making sure things don't get too cramped. But on Marooner's Bay, since the ship is so wide and narrow, plenty of shore bosses that on any other high tide map would still be right next to the basket are now on the complete far end. So bringing the eggs over is still a pain in the ass. And since the ship is so narrow, it's hard to maneuver around. Basically, if you're going over there to kill a boss, you're basically acting as a sacrificial lamb, because you won't make it back without dying. This thing really is Satan. As also with the slamming lids are the worst, and shows how this map was not designed for them. They'll block your only pathways to the rest of the map, meaning you can't clear out the area, making the map fill with bosses far quicker and ending your shift. It's absolutely terrible. This should probably be the end of the video, but the original script had me talk about Goldfish and Hydroplank in depth, as it's basically Marooner's Bay but like designed with Splatoon 3 in mind. But after restructuring, there wasn't really any need to make direct comparisons anymore, since I already got my point across on why Marooner's Bay, as well as the other stages, suffered. But like, I really like this stage. It's my favorite, and I never really went in depth with it at all in the original review, so it's not like I'm gonna get another chance to suck this stage's dick. So I'm just gonna spend this section of the video praising the stage now because it's what it deserves. This is the best stage in the game, which seems a little weird considering that it kind of goes against everything I said makes a Splatoon 3 stage good. Like what, did I fucking lie like a fucking liar? Like the entire outer section has nothing but uninkable walls, making your options more limited. Out of all the maps, it's the one where the boss spawns are the most spread out. The center area of the basket is rather small and cramped. You know, all those fun contradictions. That's only looking at it on the surface level like a shallow asshole. These feel way better incorporated with the design of Splatoon 3's mechanics in mind. The biggest thing that makes it all work is how it's separated into 3 clear sections. The center with the basket, these elevated platforms, and then the outside section. All these parts work together very well, especially the elevated platforms. This is the glue that holds this stage together, which, I don't know, that's not exactly what I would use to build a structure. Despite the bosses being more spread out, they can be easily reached from the safety of these platforms. Like even stingers and flyfish are easily reachable from here without having to go down into the more restricted section below. This means that when you kill the bosses and chum, and then they start spawning somewhere else, someone can go down there and start passing the eggs along to the elevated platforms before they get surrounded. They're dangerous, but you're not supposed to be down there for very long anyway. Even if someone gets splatted down there, someone should be able to reach them and revive them easily and safely, unlike in Marooner's Bay where if they're splatted on the beach side, you have to run a fucking marathon to reach your destination. You see, this is how my grandpa got to school every day. This leads to the last part of the map, the center. In a way, it's kind of similar to Marooner's Bay underneath Pass, where you have to go through it to get to the section faster. But unlike Marooner's Bay, once you enter here, you can immediately climb the walls and get to a safer position. This leads to the last part of the map, the center. It's very cramped, but unlike many other Splatoon 2 stages where the only escape is to kind of jump off the edge, leading you away from the basket, in Hydroplant, all the inner walls are inkable, meaning no matter where you are, you can always escape anywhere and still be able to kill bosses and toss eggs into the basket without having to travel all the way around. This whole map is perfect. I'll throw this in as well since I don't know where else to fit it. It's like you're trying to pack a suitcase and you have that one awkwardly shaped item. like a dildo. While the bosses are the most spread out, even on this map they can't spawn from this fourth wall, leaving it just to these 3 sections, making it easier to handle. It's just a wonderful map. Overall, it's very interesting. What seems like would be very minor changes, like adding new bosses, increasing the spawn rate and the danger of chums, being able to toss eggs, would turn perfectly fine and playable maps into complete hogwash that's the most unfun to play on. It makes me wonder if, like, Arc Polaris was to come back with no changes like the other maps, would it be nearly as good? I'm gonna be honest, I don't think it would. Much like the other maps, there's not a whole lot of options to escape, and none of the walls are really inkable. The ink rails are fun and novel, but it wouldn't really make the situation much better. The top area is small, and the only way to escape is, like Marooner's Bay, to jump down away from the basket, which has just kind of been a major problem with, like, some of these maps. If they wanted to make a map that used the ink rails, they're probably better off just making a new one from scratch, with all of this in mind. Funnily enough, I think Lost Outpost would probably be the map that would work best in Splatoon 3. Lost Outpost. What do you mean lost? It's right there. The entire outer wall is inkable, so if things get cramped, you always have a quick getaway option ready for you. The center area would still suffer from being cramped, but at least if you want to escape, you just kind of had to go through the doorways and lead the bosses out rather than jumping off the edge. These changes seem so minor on the surface. Like, you know, it's not like anything's fundamentally different, but it just shows how tightly these things are connected together. And when you mess with one element, even if it seems small, can just make something completely fall apart in response. I'm actually kind of shocked they kept the stages the way they were with no changes. They've done plenty of weird, unnecessary changes to returning multiplayer maps in the main game. Like, look at Mahi Mahi. Poor thing got a lobotomy. Thankfully, Nintendo has realized their mistake and is now trying to patch this thing back together with, like, a glue stick. Elmer's glue stick. But then with the Salmon Run stages, when the maps really could use some changes to better fit the more chaotic nature of Next Wave, they did jack shit. I mean, they must have known, right? They did change their design philosophy with the new stages. I don't know, I'm just asking questions to a brick wall. In response, that brick wall puts down a fucking pole.